It's like the collateral damage in a war. They suffer. You know, they. I think you're setting them up sometimes for them to have unsuccessful relationships in the future. There's no two that are exactly alike, but I don't know anybody that doesn't get through it without something, or at least a chink in their armor. I mean, let's say one of the parents is, for lack of better terms, kind of a jerk, and the other one's very understanding and nurtures the kids and all that kind of stuff. You can talk to your kid about that. I know Daddy just did this and that, but that's just, I wish he wasn't that way, but you remember, you can't control that. Okay, kids are so resilient. And there's a certain amount of truth in that. Kids tend to be resilient. Look, how many kids have we seen who have come from poverty and war-torn areas and they turn out all right. But that doesn't mean that there isn't a period where it's really tough on them. And some of them don't get through it very well. Some of them, even though years and years later, they'll still reflect back to when I was 13 and Mom and Dad, blah, 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 was going on. Maybe they changed their friends. And I think this tends to be more an issue as the kids get a little older. Maybe they start hanging out with the kids Mom and Dad aren't so interested in them hanging out with. And sometimes we don't even realize some of those things are going on. Kids might become a little more clingy. They might get a little bit more rebellious because I had heard kids tell me these horrible situations they were in, and then somewhere later, maybe 3 or 4 sessions later, sometimes that same kid would say, "But I just wish sometimes they were back together. I wish it was the way it was when we were little," or something like that.
Welcome to Season 2 of the Just Separated podcast. I'm Karen Oman, a thanatologist, grief counselor, divorce strategist, and co-author of the Just Separated workbook. I help people navigate the emotional, legal, and practical challenges of divorce, including high conflict and narcissist relationships. Each week, I am joined by expert guests to share guidance, tools, and strategies so you can move forward with clarity, confidence, and resilience. Follow Just Separated and join us as we explore the many layers of divorce. Subscribe so you never miss an episode. Welcome to the Just Separate podcast. I'm your host, Karen Oman, co-founder of the Divorce Workshop. Today, we're going to talk about Don't Forget Your Kids. And our expert guest is Dr. John Berrens. Dr. Berrens is a retired school psychologist and certified counselor who earned his master's in clinical psychology from Oakland University and his PhD from the School of Psychology from University of Cincinnati. With decades of experience in middle-aged school counseling, John focuses much of his work on supporting teens and tweens from divorce, separated, or single parents, families. His book, My Name Is, shares powerful stories from these teens to remind them they're not alone. John has since adapted the book into My Name Is, the play, which brings the important conversations to middle and high school audiences. Welcome back, Dr. Berrens, to the Just Separate podcast.
Happy to be here.
So you've spent decades working with teens and tweens, navigating family separation. Can you remember a moment early in your career when you realized just how deeply divorce can affect children?
Well, really early in my career, when I was playing more the school psychologist game than the counselor game, part of school psychology, you do a whole lot of evaluations, good or bad. It's just part of the job. And really early on, I was getting all these referrals for kids who were having learning issues, who were having behavioral issues, who may be having both learning and behavioral issues. And during the evaluation process, it became aware to me that I was seeing a disproportionate number of kids who were being referred to me who were not technically handicapped, but who were having educational issues, who came from divorced families. There were just more than should have been. And you begin to think, okay, why am I seeing these kids who they may be struggling with reading or writing or arithmetic, and they might be struggling with their behaviors with their peers, but were they educationally handicapped? No. Some of them were, but a large number of them were. And I were not, that was. And I just was seeing more and more referrals from these kids. And it just kind of sparked my interest. And because schools in many respects don't have a method or a system set up to address those issues very well. We're set up to teach kids reading, writing, and arithmetic. And when there's other stuff going on in their lives, like a divorce, like a death, something major traumatic, an illness in the family or something, schools aren't necessarily set up to handle those kids very well. And why is that? I think it's a monetary issue. There's not a lot of counselors, extra counselors and psychologists floating around in schools. I mean, when I worked as a school, strictly as a school psychologist in the state where I live, the ratio, I think it was something like 2,600 kids to every one psychologist. How effective are you going to be? And, again, I was doing school psych, but the counselor ratio isn't a whole lot better. And a lot of, at least down where I live, a lot of grade schools don't have access to a school counselor, period. It's gotten better over the last 40 years, but are there a lot of folks like me running around? I don't think so. The wealthier the school district, the better the chance of addressing those things with youngsters, or having the people to address those things with youngsters. But, lots of school districts, it's a cash issue. Not that they don't
So
want to.
yeah, so you've seen a lot of, so you saw a lot of behaviors
Yeah,
that, could you want to name some of the behaviors that you saw?
sure. Sure. I mean, I think, and this is the thing I think which parents have to be more cognizant of, is when you see changes in your kids' behaviors. Maybe they're not sleeping as well at night. Maybe little kids might, if there's a split up occurring or has already occurred, maybe the little kids maybe want to come in and sleep with mommy or daddy a little more, and they have more, maybe having troubles getting to sleep more. Older kids might suddenly, when a disrupted family is going on, they might have a tendency to lose interest in things which they had interest in before, playing on the soccer team, the hockey team, singing in the chorus at school or the choir at church. Suddenly those things just aren't as much fun. They aren't as interesting for them as much anymore. Maybe they change their friends. Suddenly, and I think this tends to be more an issue as the kids get a little older. Maybe they start hanging out with the kids mom and dad aren't so interested in them hanging out with. Um, and sometimes we don't even realize some of those things are going on. Little kids might become a little more clingy. As they get older, they might get a little bit more rebellious. I mean, there's a certain amount of rebellion that's supposed to occur with middle school and high school age kids, but maybe it goes up a couple notches. It cranks up a little bit more than what you typically see with your youngster. But you're just looking for changes. What's different?
Yeah, I think the whole thing is like the whole title of this is "Don't Forget Your Kids," is
Hmm.
because when you're going through a divorce, we tend to forget about the kids, and we don't mean to.
No, agreed.
Um, it's
Agreed.
just that it seems that we have so many things to juggle when people are going through divorce, so it can be hard on parents to
Agreed.
figure everything out.
We wear blinders. When I used to run these divorce groups, I used to kid the kids. I'd say, "Do you guys ever seen the Budweiser horses in a parade?" And most of them had. And I'd say, "Did you ever look at their heads?" And most of them, they like, "What are you asking me this crazy question for?" I said, "Look at next time you do, look at the horse's head, their face." I said, and they have these big blinders around their eyes, and that's so they don't get distracted by the crowds, because these big Budweiser Clydesdales are frequently marching in parades and things of that nature, where there's people screaming all around the place. I says, I think parents frequently have blinders on when they're going through that whole process and even afterwards. And again, you have to think about the little bit older kids. I'll talk middle high school. Um, Again, they don't recognize their behaviors, and sometimes the parents don't recognize the changes in the kids' behaviors, and sometimes the kids, they just kind of retreat into themselves. They don't want to bug mom and dad. They just kind of, you know, how many times have your kids come in after school and you say, "What how's your day today?" "Oh, it's fine. It's good." The eternal descriptor, good. That doesn't really mean that's what they are. It's kind of like when somebody passes you in the hallway and they say hi. It's just an automatic thing we do to people. You say hi to them, having a good day, that kind of thing. Well, sometimes kids will get that way with their parents too. Rather than saying, "Mom, I'm really blah blah blah," or "Dad, I'm really blah blah blah," it's just, "It's fine, it's cool, no problem, leave me alone." You know. And with the older kids, one of the behaviors I didn't mention earlier is spending more time in isolation. And again, part of that is natural. They get a little older, they spend more time in their bedrooms, and especially in this day and age with all the electronic devices, it's easier for them to hide themselves in their rooms and not inter, inter, uh, get involved with family members. But again, that can increase more just as a way to get away from the stuff that's going on in the household, which might not be very comfortable for them to observe.
So I wanted to ask you, like, feeding off of that, is society kind of tells people, like, oh, your kids are resilient. Kids will be fine.
Yeah,
They'll
yeah,
get through this.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so what are your thoughts on that? Because I remember hearing it in my own life as a child of divorce, like, oh, yeah, my grandparents would say, oh, you'll be fine. Kids are good. You're going to get through this. It's easy, whatever. Right. And that's kind of society too. Right. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's a bunch of BS, to be perfectly honest with you. I mean, we all have different levels of getting through it or coping with it, maybe a better description. And some kids, it's not as big a deal as it is for others. There's no two that are exactly alike, but I don't know anybody that doesn't get through it without something, or at least a chink in their armor. Um, and I mean, I even know, I know adult friends whose parents got divorced when the kids themselves were adults, and there's still, it's just a different set of issues that come up. For the adults versus when you're 11 or 12 or 6 or 9 or 15. I don't think, but we do have that society thing. They're okay. Kids are so resilient. And there's a certain amount of truth in that. Kids tend to be resilient. I mean, look, how many kids have we seen who have come from poverty and in war-torn areas and that, and they turn out all right. But that doesn't mean that there isn't a period where it's really tough on them. And some of them don't get through it very well. Some of them, even though years and years later, they'll still reflect back to when I was 13 and mom and dad, blah 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 blah, was going on. It's still there. Um, and I've heard it. It's interesting because in my practice in working in the schools, some it wasn't unusual for me to talk to the parents of some of these kids, and it's a lot of parents of kids, if they're divorced, it's surprising how many of those kids also, or those now adults, came from a divorced family. And they'll, some of those parents will tell me, yeah, I still have memories when mom and dad were doing X, Y, and Z, or oh my gosh, I hope my kids aren't going through the same thing I went through, 30 years ago when my parents were splitting up. And I worry about, well, I hope I'm not doing this to my kids, or I've heard those kinds of things out of mouths of parents when they've come into school for whatever reason. So yeah, I resilient, yeah, to an extent, yeah. Some more than others. There's the one thing I learned real early in graduate school was there's no cookie cutter cookbook to figure out how to deal with all these things. Every case is different, And so people sometimes ask me, well, what should I do here? And I say, well, this might work, and it might not. And what works for person A might not work for person B, and it might work kind of okay for person C. And we want answers. Certain personalities want answers,
Mm-hmm.
and they aren't always there so clear and so concise and
So
full.
isn't that go back to, sorry to interrupt, but isn't that go back to know your child? Like
Oh
one
yeah,
child,
yeah.
I was always known as the more sensitive child, right? Where my older sister, not as like different, right? So
Hmm.
if you could, not one of the tips you can give today then is know your children. Some are going to be different
Certainly,
than others, right?
certainly. Yeah, that's a big deal. And like you just said, two kids in the same family can be as different as night and day in terms of how they react to it. The one kid goes off the deep end and screams and yells and hollers, and the other kid might be okay and figure out how to work through it, and another kid might get depressed.
Mm-hmm.
You can see their reactions can cover the spectrum, and that can even be kids who at home can be within a few years of each other age wise. It can be the 15-year-old, the 12-year-old, and the 8-year-old. Yeah, they aren't that far apart in age. They can have
Mm-hmm.
very different reactions to it. And I think a little bit of that even can depend on the relationship the youngsters have with the parents. You know, um, let's say you've got for instance, a young man, let's say middle school age, 12, 13, somewhere in there, 14, and he was really close to his dad. And maybe dad did the sports thing and the fishing and the hunting or whatever they did together. They just did stuff together. They just got along real well. But then the split up occurred, and the wouldn't, and let's say dad was a little testy with mom or something like that, and maybe most of the people blame dad for it, and then you see the young man standing up for dad and taking that side, and he can't quite process it. He can't deal with it the way maybe his other siblings do, who didn't see dad, didn't put dad on quite the pedestal that the one child did. So that can be awkward at best. And let's say in that particular situation, you know, the kids end up living with mom. And now you've got this kid who longs to have his old relationship with his dad, but it just doesn't work so well. He may react very differently than a younger sibling who has a different relationship with the dad for whatever reason.
So what you just sound there is like that story is there's a lot of grief that can be there.
Oh, certainly, certainly, certainly. Yeah. I mean, what you had is no more. It's different. And, we've all experienced loss, whether it's a parent or a good friend or whatever, whether it's by death or just even a relationship. I mean, when you move, somebody moves out of town who was your best friend, there's a little bit of there's a kind of an adjustment period there. And if mom or dad they split up and now you're living with one and you don't see the other one very often, sure, why isn't it the way it used to be? And what's interesting about that also, just to comment a little further, is sometimes whenever we run these groups for kids, sometimes the kid will say, "I knew they had to get divorced. They've been arguing for years sometimes." And in some ways, it's a bit of a relief because I don't have to listen to this stuff day in and day out at the house. Sometimes that stuff goes on for years until somebody finally, flips the switch and says, "This has got to be over." But even when that occurs, sometimes the kids will say things like, "But I wish they were still back together," even though they knew it was, and they lived in a very uncomfortable household when all this fighting or whatever was going on. Still afterwards, it's like, gosh, I wish they were still together.
Why do they do that?
Please?
Why do they want that? Why do they want that? Like, I remember being a child of divorce, young child,
Mm-hmm.
and they should have never, it was not a good marriage, but
Mm-hmm.
why did I crave that? Like, that's a good, I'm a child, I get it, but you look at when you're older, you go, oh, that doesn't even make sense that I wanted that. But do you have any insight onto that?
I wish I did, because I had heard kids tell me these horrible situations they were in, and then somewhere later, maybe 3 or 4 sessions later, sometimes that same kid would say, "God, I just wish sometimes they were back together. I wish it was the way it was when we were little," or something like that. And maybe it's that dream, and maybe and I think a little bit of that sometimes occurs if there's a second relationship with either or both of the adults. Mom or dad maybe get married, maybe they move in with somebody, whatever, and that isn't so slick with the kids. I don't like this new guy that mom's dating, or I don't like this new girl that dad's dating, or dad's going to get married to this girl, and I don't like this person. So I think if it was better, even though it might have been horrible for a few years at home or months or whatever, there kind of still might be that dream of, oh, gee, it was, we used to have good times as a family. We used to go on vacations. We used to whatever. Why can't that be back? I don't like this new lady that Dad's dating, or this new guy that's just moved in with mom, and they're not married. And, that's another whole ball game for that teenage kid. How are you? Why are you moving in with this girl? You're not married. Here I am 13 and I'm trying to figure out this whole boyfriend girlfriend thing. It's just maybe starting 13, 14, 15. And, mom's been divorced from dad now for a year and a half, and she's been dating this guy for 2 months and he's moving in. Huh? And mom's telling me, you better not do X, Y, and Z when you're out with your boyfriend. It can cause a lot of confusion for that teenage population. And some of that then can feed back into that, it was so much better when we were little. We had fun as a family.
So they're grieving too then, really.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
So how do you get parents, and this happens a lot too, is when they use their child as someone to lean on, especially that tween and teenagerhood.
Oh, yeah. The kid becomes a therapist. Well, it's a tough one. I don't, being in the schools, I rarely had the opportunity to talk to the parents about something like that. But what I talk to the kids about sometimes is sometimes you got to be really forceful with your parent. Mom, I really, I don't understand it. Mom, I still really love dad. Or dad, I miss mom. And, I can't deal with all this stuff you're trying to lay on me. And, that's really hard. It's the same thing with, and it's not completely unlike when one or both of the parents use the kids as pawns, in the battle, or is we used to use the phrase in our groups, the mailman or messenger boy. Tell your mom that I'm gonna be a little late next week when I come to pick you up for visitation, or you know, is your mom dating anybody now? you know, are you guys have enough stuff there? You have enough food to eat? And putting the kid in that, we always refer to it as being caught in the middle. And I've advised many kids just to say, look them right in the face and say, knock it off. I'm not your messenger point. If you want to know what dad's doing, you call him up. You want to know what mom's doing, you call him up. Leave me out of it. I'm not picking sides. And it's harder to talk to a kid about that being that forceful if they're being used as mom or dad's counselor or therapist. You know, and I think that even happens. Maybe it happens more with older kids. I think it happens more to girls than it does guys. I think moms tend to lean on girls more than dads do on guys for that kind of emotional support. Girls, in my experience, girls tend to get more wound up in the emotional stuff than guys do. Um, I think it's just what happens. I mean, and this is the typical example. You know how everything's fine. Um, when I would recruit for these groups that I did in schools, and I would have anywhere from 8 to 12 kids in a group, and I would be lucky if I had more than two guys in any group, whether there was 8 kids or 12 kids in the group. And the guys, for the most part, tended to be less communicated less in the group, shared less in the group than the girls did. Became less emotional about when if they were discussing their history or even just discussing something that happened a week ago at home. They just tended to be more back offish than the girls did. So I think there's that tendency. I could be wrong here, but I think there's a tendency for moms and girls to lean on each other a little bit too much sometimes. You know, mom, you need somebody to talk to. Talk to your girlfriend. Talk to your sister. Talk to some. I'm not your therapist. And again, part of what can happen with the parent trying to it's trying to get the kid to be there, the one they lean on or talk to maybe too much, is sometimes it can turn into a trying to get the kid, not on purpose, but because of the things they talk about, it can lead a real negative light on dad. If mom's there and she's complaining about dad or this happened or I wish we still had this when we were married before, I used to love this and then dad left, or vice versa, dad can be doing the exact same thing. They don't need to be beating up on moms here on this particular situation. But you're kind of complaining, and it's hard then for the kid, if they're really still close to the dad, to hear this bad stuff about dad. It's not necessarily bad stuff. It's mom's opinion of the stuff about dad. It's mom's observation, and the kid's hearing it all, and maybe that's not fair to the kid. I don't think it
Yeah,
is.
speaking of that, because you're talking about communication, right? Like you
Oh yeah,
walk in and but also you can, it doesn't have to be just by talking. It can be by your behavior, the
yeah,
parent's behavior, right? Like body language, right? Like
oh yeah.
I made the mistake, and I'll admit to everybody that's listening, is one of the first Christmas gifts they got from their father. I rolled my eyes. I
Hmm.
did that.
Oops.
I went, and I went after, like, months after, I said, why did I do that?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Like, so we have to be also mindful of our body, right?
yeah,
Because
yeah.
like I repaired and I felt bad, but that sticks with them, right? So um I don't know if you want to talk about behavior, well, we talked about it a bit before, but be careful how you're behaving, not just communicating.
Sure, Sure. Yeah. Dad comes to the door and you're standing there like this, you know, or you make some snarky, you come home and you're in a really good mood after you visit, let's say you live with mom and you just, and you were, let me back up on that. You live with dad and you were just visiting mom and you had a really great time out with mom. You went someplace and you were out all day. And, you had the weekend with mom and you did something with both of you's love. And now you come in the door and you're all excited and dad just kind of puts it down. You went there again, you know? What do you even like that place? So I suppose she blew all the money I gave her for this month for child support this month on whatever. Look at my new coat, Dad. So you went shopping. What's she going to do now? Ask me for more money?
Yeah, as you're saying that, I can feel as the child, they'd feel like, wow,
Yeah.
and then that would hurt with talking to dad about everything, right? Because what you
Oh,
want
sure.
your kids is to talk about everything, but
Yeah. Yeah.
that just kind of shuts the kid down.
Yeah. 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 But you're right. The behaviors, we show it. And ideally, everybody would be very excited. Oh, did you have a good time at Mom? I'm glad you got to go to Kings Island this weekend. That was wonderful, Or you got that new coat. I know you've been wanting it. Yeah, that would be nice if they were, but that doesn't always happen. And sometimes we don't even have to say anything, like you said. It can just let simply be the look on our face, or the smirk, or the when they're trying to tell us about Kings Island is a big amusement park down here in Cincinnati. I mean, it could be you're not paying attention to them. You're fixing dinner, and they're trying to tell you about this great time they just had with mom at Kings Island, and you're just kind of doing whatever you're doing to fixing dinner, not paying them any attention at all. You know, it's almost not paying attention to them by omission. You're just you're there. I'm fixing the
Mhm.
hot dogs and whatever for dinner. Yeah.
So what are some of the things, and so um I know that when you have a higher conflict divorce, and one is
Hmm.
generally usually one more high conflict than the other.
Hmm.
And so it's always been researched that the one that's kind of more stable or more emotionally regulated tends to help with that buffer with the co-parenting situation, right? So if you understand what I mean, that having one stable parent can really be helpful to
Oh yeah,
this.
sure.
So can you explain that a little bit about why?
Well, I mean, I think that's the one the kids can talk to. I think that's the one who can be the buffer with maybe the buffer with with the other parent that isn't so friendly, but maybe not. And again, it's how you can communicate that with your youngster. I mean, let's say one of the parents is, for lack of better terms, kind of a jerk, and the other one's very understanding and nurtures the kids and all that kind of stuff. You can talk to your kid about that. I know daddy just did this and that, but that's just, I wish he wasn't that the way, but you remember, you can't control that. You don't have control over what either daddy or mommy does. I mean, you can only deal with what we can deal with here. You know that I care about you, that I love you. You know, I can't control dad either, or I can't control mom either. I wish I could, but I can't. If we got along better, we never would have got divorced. Maybe, I don't know if I'd say that, but that's kind of what you're going at there. Something happened and we split up. Sometimes they have to be the consoling one and the comforter. Um, and sometimes again, the tricky part in doing that is if you have to be honest with your kid about the parent that isn't so friendly or has more issues with this. How do you do that without putting that person down, without sounding like you're hostile towards that person? And that's hard, but you just have to kind of go from the heart and without using the wrong terms, with keeping a calm voice, with keeping the eye contact, and maybe if any kind of physical touching works, taking a hand or an arm around a shoulder, and lay out what the kid knows. Well, daddy's kind of had a problem with his temper, or mom sometimes just kind of rants and raves or whatever, or we both know that. We both experience it. I wish we could change it, but I can't, and you can't either. You know?
So it sounds like you're validating
Yeah,
what they're
yeah,
what they're going
yeah, yeah,
through,
yeah.
but that's a fine line,
It sure is.
right?
Yeah, because you don't want to come off as, yeah, he's a blah blah blah, or she is. Yeah,
Yeah, that's probably one of the trickiest things that parents have to do.
Oh, sure, sure, sure. And truth of the matter is, somewhere down the line, there's a reasonable chance if the kids get married that both parents will be there, and you don't want that to screw up the wedding, And if the kids are involved after a marriage, there's probably going to be some events where everybody might be invited, and let's figure out a way to get along. We might not like each other, but how can we get along? You know, and how can and if he doesn't or she doesn't play the game right, well, you can kind of talk about that and see what their feelings are about it. You see what mom or dad is doing, which isn't very friendly or nice or kind or whatever word you want to use to describe it. How do you feel about that? Do you see it? Is that bothering you too? Or this is almost even a better one. I get the feeling that when mom or dad does X, Y, or Z, you're not comfortable with that. It bugs you. It gets under your skin. And the advantage of doing the thing I just described or modeled is then you're not asking a question. Do you get really upset when dad does that? Or does mom really make you mad when you do that? Because again, I think we've talked about this in previous times we've chatted, is when you ask a question, you expect an answer, and you're putting them in a corner. Whereas if you reflect on what you think you're seeing, you give them a chance to respond. But if they don't, they don't. And the more you can respond to your youngster that way, over time they may catch on that I can answer this. This isn't just a one pony show. The mom or dad is kind of changing the way they're communicating. They used to be the 50 question person. Now they're just kind of tuning into what they think I'm feeling. And again, back to training a million years ago. Is this guy who's one of my practicum supervisors said, if you get it wrong, they'll tell you. So don't worry about it. Give it a shot. If you think they're angry and they're not angry, they're sad, they'll probably say, no, I'm not angry, I'm sad.
So isn't that also, as we've mentioned before as well, it's also read the room of this child.
Yeah.
Right? And as your supervisor said, like, they'll tell you. Yeah. Right? Like, so if you read the room wrong, don't worry. They're going to tell you.
Yeah.
But and I do like the fact that we have to remind people about, instead of questioning, do the statements instead. It is really important. We all forget that though, right?
Oh, we all do. Yeah, certainly. Yeah. We do it with kids. We do it with our adult friends, with our spouses. We do that all the time, unfortunately. We want to, as parents with kids, we want to make it better. We want to be Superman, Supermom, and come in there and make it better. So I'm going to ask you the question, and I'm going to figure out how we can make this better. And that magic wand thing just doesn't work. In one of my offices, one of the teachers gave me a magic wand once, which I hung in my office, and I put a sign underneath it. And I says, unfortunately, the batteries have run out and it doesn't work anymore. And I used to kid about that with the kids every once in a while, because it was a little thing which actually did have a battery. You could put it in, turn a little switch, and it kind of sparkled a little bit. The batteries wore out, and the magic wands don't work.
Yeah, it's a cute story, and I'm so glad you brought it up again, because I think it needs to be said over and over and over again, because I think, as you said, we all do it all the time.
Yeah.
Questions. Instead, it should be just statements, validation, read the room.
Yeah. And it's not easy.
No, it's not easy.
We're not used to talking and acting that way.
No, we were never. We weren't probably like that in our own family.
No.
Right.
No.
So it's practice.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the schools I worked in, I developed a peer mediation program, and where we had trained mediators, and if 2 7th graders were having it out, they could be referred to this peer mediation. And the 2 kids would be in there. I'd be outside. I wouldn't even be in the room. I would be outside in case if they got into trouble, which occasionally they did. But part of our training for those kids was to learn how to reflect, not ask so many questions. You can get the same information by not putting them in a corner and making a statement as you can by asking the question. And you'd be surprised when you train a bunch of, and I had eighth and ninth graders in one building and eighth graders in another building. I had the mediation program in two different buildings. You'd be surprised how good these kids got at it. It takes practice.
Yeah, great point. So
Yeah.
how do parents, like, before we wrap up, how do parents not forget about their children?
Well, I think we've kind of touched on it. You watch them, you listen to
Watch them.
them, you look for changing behaviors, you listen to what they're saying, watch their bodies when they're saying it, watch their bodies when they're not saying things. You just kind of tune, for lack of better terms, you got to tune into them. And then you got to reflect on what you think's going on. And you got to be honest with them. Sometimes kids want things to change, which can't be changed. You know, I can't get back with mom because of X, Y, and Z. You don't have to go into all the nitty gritty details, but you can find a way to make it understandable. And again, the real important thing, we didn't bring this up earlier, but you got to think about the age level you're talking to. If you're talking to a 6-year-old versus talking to a 16-year-old or talking to a 11-year-old, it's a completely different ball game in how you approach it. And sometimes parents don't do that very well. They talk to the little ones like they're teenagers. And the little ones, they just sit there and they nod and they say, "Oh yeah, I get it, mom, I get it, dad." And sometimes it's right over their heads.
So here's a question too. What are the consequences when you forget about the children?
Well, it's like the collateral damage in a war. They suffer. you know they I think you're setting them up sometimes for them to have unsuccessful relationships in the future. Not all won't, but some will. There's a higher proportion of kids who get divorced who came from divorced families. you know so you're kind of setting them up a little bit for that. You're setting them up for doing all the things if they get depressed over it, you're setting them up for all the things that might accompany depression. Maybe they'll see a fall in grades at school. Maybe they'll start hanging out with the wrong kids at school. Maybe they'll show a lack of interest, kind of back to those behavior things, in things which they used to love. And the choir at school or church or the soccer team or the hockey team or whatever it is, they just kind of back off. And then they're not going to develop into the person maybe they could have developed into. You know, maybe they don't go to college when they have all the right stuff to do, that they could be very successful in college, just because they're down in the dumps and they don't see a future for themselves. You know, I'm never going to be any good at this. They see themselves from a failing family. You know, they might themselves doubt their ability to date when they get older, or they might follow in a bad pattern which they saw between mom and dad. If one person maybe was emotionally or physically abusive, that there's a chance that that may occur because that's what they saw. They saw that if unfortunately they were in one of those families where they had to witness dad being abusive towards mom, maybe not physically, but maybe emotionally, verbally abusive, and the son grows up and follows in that same pathway. And that's where, and to use that example, that's when people, I'm convinced that mom needs to jump in. Say, look, X, Y, and Z occur. It's hard to do when they're real little. You have to watch what you're saying. But, this, did you saw what was going on in this house? I got the feeling it wasn't so good to watch. You didn't say did you like watching it? You're kind of thrown. I'm just curious. I don't know if you remember the old, God, it was back in the 80s. There was a TV show called Columbo. And there was this detective that always used to pull his hair like this. And he would always ask this question and act like he was stupid. And he always knew the answer to the question before he asked it. And sometimes you can do that with your kids. Not quite that exaggerated, but kind of ask the things which you know, or put them in a statement in a fashion that you're pretty sure you know what's going on with the youngster. I just don't feel that you're real happy around here anymore, or haven't seen you with Susie going out lately, or you don't want to play soccer? God, you used to love soccer. Rather than, why'd you quit the soccer team?
It's a difference there, right?
And there's a difference there. And again, you're showing them that you care, that you're interested, and you're trying to make them more, for lack of better terms, a whole human being, so they don't fall into the ruts when they get older. But I mean, I'm sure you probably know some people who are adults that have never gotten over their parents split up. I mean, I do. I know a
Oh
few.
yeah, yeah. I'm also just thinking if they can afford it, would you recommend that they seek therapy for their children?
Yes, but I'm gonna put a little catch on that. Um, I have found, and this is not only from working for kids from divorce groups or from divorced families, but man, I think there's something to be said for the power with the group. If you can get them with other groups, other kids, I just think it. And that's not only from working with kids from divorce. I mean, I ran groups for kids who were from alcoholics. I ran a group called I Hate School, and they were just kids that they were just kids who by seventh grade did everything they could do to only get a D in school. They just hated school. They wore the clothes that didn't fit in. They were the slugs, and they just hated school. But when you get all those kids together, and it's amazing how then you start to peel away at where did this come from? Where did this come from? And it is. I saw in the divorce groups, it was always I thought I was the only one like this. I thought I was so alone. Nobody understood what I was going through. If I
Yeah,
heard
peer
that,
supports are amazing
yeah,
for.
and I'm not beating up individual counseling. I think
Mhm.
individual counseling can work. I always got a kick. This is my own selfishness here, but I always got a kick out of when sometimes a parent would call me at the end of the year and she said, I had little Susie seeing this therapist for 6 months, and after we split up a couple years ago, and it just was a waste of my money. And little Susie was in this school group with 8 of her friends or 8 of her classmates, not necessarily friends, and she's a changed person.
Yeah,
We get along now.
support groups could be amazing.
I am
I've run them
absolutely
too. They're
sold on it.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I volunteered for a place in Cincinnati called Fernside, which dealt with grieving children and their families, and I dealt with the adults. And while the kids went in other little groups, and every year we'd start these groups in September, and every year right around Christmas time, in the adult group that I was running, some adult would say, this seems to kind of be working. Little Joey is he kind of gets it a little more. He's a little nicer at home. He's doing his schoolwork. And I would just, sit back and grin, and I'd say, well, the people down the hall with little Joey, it's not just one person with little Joey, it's the facilitator and 7 other little Joeys in that group. And that made the difference.
Here's a question though: are they everywhere? Like, are there peer supports for divorced families?
No. And that's,
Like,
you know, Karen, when I first started this game, of being a school psychologist. Uh, I told you what I noticed about the disproportionate number of kids. And there's an organization in Cincinnati called Beach Acres, and they actually were running these groups at various places around town, churches, community centers, stuff like that. And they offered free training to facilitate these groups. And that got me out of a morning of work for like 6 weeks. So sure, I was going to sign up for it. So I went to their beach acres, and I learned how to facilitate these groups, and I was sold on it. And that was part of the reason why I changed from being strictly a school psychologist into working in the counseling center, because I didn't have time to do that kind of stuff when I was playing school psychologist. I was doing evaluations every day. But are they out there in the community? No,
Mhm.
not that I know of. I think in my neck of the woods down here in Cincinnati, I think certain schools, and I'm going to tell you schools that got more money, probably do this because they have more staff, and more staff can do it. But then it also takes a personal interest of the staff member to want to do it. Some staff members, that's just not their thing. For me, it was always my thing. Whether it was divorce groups, children of alcoholics groups, or whatever, I just got a kick out of running groups.
well, they were lucky to have you
Well, maybe.
because
I'd like to think so.
because I don't see it happening much. It happens with grief. I see them in
Hmm.
like the Doogie Center. I think it's the Doogie
Yeah,
Center is a
that's the
big
firm
one.
side thing I was referring to.
Yeah, it's a big one. And
And
there's
they actually go into schools. Fernside does, but the negative there is, and it's not a big negative, but it's these kids, these people that go into the schools are strangers,
mm,
and it's a whole lot easier if it's Dr. B down in the counseling office, or Mrs. C, and who's who works in the school. It's a familiar face.
mhm.
I think always works a little bit. I think it's easier to get it off the ground when you have a familiar face. I think it's easier to recruit kids for the groups when you have when you're the person that's been in the building since as long as they've been in the building.
Makes sense. So I ask everybody at the end, you already know this because you were on last year, but for someone who just separated, whether they left or were left, what advice would you give them to help them navigate those overwhelming early days?
The kids or the adults?
Why don't you do the kids?
Well,
so the parents can hear who are listening,
yeah,
and maybe they can understand better.
I think in terms of navigating those early days, I think it's keep yourself open. If you have to develop a little strong, if you've got people that care a little bit more, because right now the household is on fire, shall we say? If it's a grandma, a grandpa, an aunt, and uncle, or a teacher, a coach, use those people if you can. Talk to those people. The grandparents can have the potential to play a great role in helping support youngsters, as well as an aunt or an uncle or a good friend of the family can. Use them, and if the the parent who has primary responsibility for the kids, let's say it's not shared custody and they're with one, and even if it is shared custody and they flip flop back and forth, which can be interesting, don't be afraid to use your mom or your dad or your brother or somebody to help out. You can't do it all, because like as we've mentioned several times already, sometimes your brain's on fire because you're going through this whole mess yourself and you're kind of forgetting the kids. And maybe you're forgetting the kids, but you don't know how not to forget the kids because you're too wound up in all the crap yourself. So if you have to use other people, use other people. You know who your couple trusted friends are, or relatives are, or a neighbor or whomever. It's okay. You don't have to be able to do it all yourself. As long as you trust the person that might fulfill that role a little bit for you, or help you. I should say fulfill the role, help you out. Nobody should take the role of the parent, but it doesn't harm to help the parent out a little bit. Yeah.
Great advice. So I know you have your book.
Oh, yeah.
You want to tell us about your book and then all other stuff going on, and
Okay.
where they can get in touch with you.
Sure. Well, I did write a book. I actually remembered to bring it this time. Is it on the camera? Yeah, there it is. It's a book is called My Name Is. It's 7 short stories. They're all told by teenagers. I think the youngest is 7th grade. The oldest is a senior in high school. And they're stories, kids telling what they went through with their particular family situation. Some of the situations in the book are strictly divorce. Some of them are separation. And a couple of them are single parent families who the marriage never occurred. Maybe they lived with the guy for a while or the girl for a while, whatever the case may be. And needless to say, they've gone in their separate directions. The book is done fairly well, although, self-publishing a book is not fun because I don't know how to market it. But you can purchase the book one of 2 places. The first place, everybody can purchase the book at Amazon if you want. Just look up my name. It's John Berrens. You can Google that and you'll find how to get to Amazon. And there's another place, another platform I put my book on. It's called Locally Signed. You just put those 2 words together, locallysigned.com. It's the same price both places. The one difference is if you buy it off of Locally Signed and you want my signature on it, I sign it for you because I'm actually the one that mails it out. If you buy it on that particular platform, I mean, it's not this. None of this is about making money. Believe me, when you write a book, you don't make any money unless you sell millions and millions. And we're not quite there. But from the book, my latest project, which I don't know who it'll be available to or whatever, but I took the book and I took the 7 characters from the book, the 7 students that tell their stories, and turned it into a play. Now, what the play is it's a series of short scenes. Each scene, the 7 kids, it is a divorce group that takes place on stage. And there's a character who I call Dr. C, who is essentially be somebody like myself, who moderates it. It takes place in a school guidance office or a school conference room, wherever the kids may be meeting. And it's just a series of short scenes where the kids discuss their a different situation. For example, the first scene is kids telling a little bit of their story, so you know who the kids are, where they're coming from, and from then on in, it's something which might come up. Let me give you, for instance, one scene, a kid comes in and says, "I just can't get along with my dad. I just can't stand my dad anymore." And this is somebody who used to be really close to his dad. And so then the kids talk about getting along. Do they get along with both their parents since the split up has occurred? There's another scene where mom and dad's new boyfriends or girlfriends. How you dealing with that? So one kid comes in and says, I can't stand dad's new girlfriend. And then the other girl, "Oh, I got mom's boyfriend." And so they discuss that. And one of the things I did in the play, which people have kind of patted me on the back for, which I'll take credit for it, is I don't have the Dr. C character talk very much at all after the first session. I wanted to show the audience, and the play is designed to take for adults or anybody sixth grade on up. But I wanted to show the audience that kids could empathize, that kids could ask the right questions, that kids could see what was going on. So a lot of things which, when I ran groups, I might tend to ask, I let the kids ask them. I let the kids make the observations. I let the kids make the empathetic response. Because I want the audience to see that kids can really do that. It's not just an adult thing. So it's a little bit of a teaching mechanism that way. And one of the scenes in the thing is, because every scene opens up with this Dr. C character saying something like, well, after the first one, when they tell the stuff, is, well, does anybody have anything they want to say today? And nobody has anything they want to bring up that day. So Dr. C says, well, I was just kind of wondering, do you think your parents' divorce will affect your relationships down the road? Do you think you might want to get married or dating or any of that stuff? So that whole scene goes through the kids' fears or thinking about or planning for dating down the road, which is, and again, the scenes aren't long because you can't have a play last 2 hours in a school. Most of the scenes after the first scene, most of the scenes last between 4 and maybe 6 minutes, but it just hits on the essentials of what those kids are what kids typically go through.
Sounds great.
The one difference between the book and the play is one of the not criticisms, but one of the things people have asked me about the book is, well, what happens to these kids? Because if you read the book, you'd find out that every story ends kind of when things are kind of settled. Okay, this is where I'm going to live. This is what happened with mom and dad. Okay, bye. In the play, the final scene, and I kind of got a kick out of how we did this, all the kids go off after the final meeting, when the kind of the hugs and all that kind of stuff. It's the end of the school year. It's the end of their senior year. Because I made all the kids in the book seniors in high school. They all use the same stories, but they're all seniors in high school. So the kids all funnel off stage and they're kind of all upset because it's the end of the year and they're excited and all those things which seniors experience. But most of it has to do with, these were friends that I developed over the last 9 months. So then the lights come back up and a Dr. C character's standing there and he says, he holds up the book and he says, one of the criticisms we got from this book, which I just told you, he says, but there's nothing like a 10-year high school reunion. I have all the kids 6 of the kids come back on stage and they all take a step forward. And to plug the book and the play a little bit, she says, for example, my name is Olivia. I'm now 28. You might remember me, and blah, 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 blah. And then she gives just 2 or 3 sentences about where she is now at age 28. Have 6 of the 7 kids do that. When they're all done, the Dr. C character turns to the audience and says, you might have noticed that so-and-so didn't show up. Well, let me tell you about him. And he says, he had his younger brother and sister in school, and they wouldn't tell what was going on. And finally, mom broke down one day. And so he tells a little bit about the one kid that doesn't show up. Lights go down. That kid enters the stage again. Lights come back up, and all 7 kids. This was my favorite line, and I wish I had written it, but my wife did. It's, our stories are nobody's stories. Our stories are everybody's stories. Play's done. Then everybody puts their tissues down.
It's really good.
I think it works, and with so that's kind of it. That's where the play is. We're about to workshop it. I think I finally found a group that's going to workshop it for me. So we'll go from there. Talk
Sounds
to you more about
wonderful.
it.
I hope it takes off and it can spread and go throughout
Well,
a lot of high
we'll
schools.
see. And this the book, just like the play, it's not. I didn't do this to make money. I don't care if I make a penny. I don't want to lose money, but I don't care about making any money on it. I just want to get this out in the schools or the general public.
Yeah. Well, I love your advocacy work there too, and I'm thankful for you for coming back on because
Oh, I enjoyed it.
you always teach like me things, and we all when we're going through a really tough time as divorce, we don't want to forget about the kids.
No,
And so thank you for all your wisdom and
no,
advice here. We need more awareness around this because there's consequences, right?
there is. Yeah, yeah.
All right. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you very
Berrens.
much. Good talking to you, Karen.
Thanks for joining today's conversation with our divorce expert. Check out the show notes for more about our guests, and don't forget to follow us on Spotify and our YouTube channel, divorceworkshop.ca. We'd love to hear from you. Share your questions, comments, or guest suggestions. And for a complete guide to navigating separation and divorce, check out the Just Separated workbook on Amazon. It covers emotions, co-parenting, finances, legal insights, and recovery. A must-have for anyone going through separation or divorce.